Hi, Sally. I'll share my screen. Okay. Oh, it's the time. Okay, let's begin. Good afternoon and welcome to the International Conference on Design Futures, IDEAS Lab Futures Literacy. I'm Xiaqing, one of the hosts of this IDEAS Lab. I come from Academy of Arts and Design, Tsinghua University. Now I'm studying for a PhD student and my research direction is design methods and tools related to future thinking. This IDEAS Lab is jointly presented by Tsinghua University's Design Futures Group and UNESCO's Futures Literacy Labs. It will be hosted by me and Sally Lin from UNESCO. Sally and I will introduce the basic information of Tsinghua University Design Futures Group and the Futures Literacy Labs. At the same time, we will enjoy the wonderful sharing of 4 guests from the United Nations. And before we start today's sharing, I'd like to ask all of our listeners to think about our questions. The first one is, what are 3 predictions you have for the future of learning in 2050? And the second is, what are 3 hopes you have for the future learning in 2050? And what do you think future literacy is about? And what would you like to know about future literacy? These questions will help us understand what we are going to share today. Okay, first of all, let me introduce the practice that the Design Futures Group of Tsinghua University doing, and that is the design foresight. I invite everyone to think about whether in our vision of the future, we really distinguish between the future that technologies want and the future that human beings want. When we design, we find that as technology advances faster and faster, our vision of future is often constrained. As it is now, we often use user feedback data collected in the background of the system as an indicator of design updates, such as click rate, purchase rate, and so on. However, when users give their feedback, they often only represent their immediate needs and ignore the long-term development of the design. That is very normal because long-term thinking is the responsibility of the creators, not the users. Behind this lies the simple logic of the fact that designer speculation is being ceded to users, and designers are losing their control over the long-term value of their designs. So let's take design thinking as an example. It starts from the problem. The target audience is users, and it focuses more on how to solve the problems from the user feedback immediately at the moment. Its goal is to achieving. So another design possibilities and that we are looking for is future thinking. It focuses on the long-term possibilities and the future vision of a design, considers the development of all people and all beings, lies on the designer's thinking to explore the possibilities, and aims to inspire all stakeholders to jointly explore the preferred future. That is to see compared with other design types it is future-centered design, and its content is to more consider includes subjects, namely humans, ourselves, and objects, named things, which may produce possibilities as a change over time. Then, based on the thought model or say mindset of future thinking, we put forward practices, method of design foresight to promote it to guide design practice. The term foresight was introduced by Irwin and Martin in the book Foresight in Sense Changing Winners. Foresight is not just about speculation, it is more about shaping, even creating the future we choose. And there are two premises. The first one is there are many possibilities for the future. The second one is the future is a choice. It haven't been decided. And on this basis, the design foresight more is to use the way of design to carry out the foresight and realize the foresight. That is to say, using the mean of design, imagine the display of possibilities of the futures and choose the futures in alternatives to shape and create. We carry out design foresight, including its mindset, method, process, and the tool. So I'm going to sharing some of the explorations we've made so far. The first is an exploration attempt in the course of interaction design. We try to use futurology tools to carry out the design research through future thinking and cross-disciplinary practice with speculative prototyping. The course is divided into 4 weeks. In the whole design process, we not only use the design method, as you see the blue part, but also the future research method, the right part, to construct the whole future design process. On this basis, we have built 2 tools, the first of which is a possession tool, as you see. This approach helps to create more humanized designs. With the method, we firstly imagine a humanized assistant who can help you solve some problems in the future and assign the humanized assistant's humanity and problem-solving system or style to a diegetic object, and then find a near-term solution to simulate the narrative object. And this is the converse of these two. And the second tool is the symbiotic tool. It leads us to think about the worldview. What kind of future you want to create with your design firstly when we solve specific problems. Next, imagine how strongly your design interacts with you in that world, whether it's a high autonomous machine or a tool that people interact with it very often. This is an example of this tool, which assumes the possibilities of design of different products according to the strengths of human-computer interaction under 2 different worldviews. In addition, we produced a design called Nest Toaster. It's an intelligent assistant that helps advanced design process approach. It works by machine the design team's difficulties with existing design tools. So to solve the problems facing by the design teams. it works. And above, you can see this is the machine. You can just scanning the QR code on the box, and then it will give the two sheet to help you. And above is the introduction of some practices of the Future Design Group. And on November 13th, at the International Conference on Design Futures, we will be releasing the Design Futures toolset. So in today's Ideas Lab, we prepared a whiteboard to display the questions and feelings collected before, and you can scan the QR code to check this content. Okay, that's all of my sharing. So next, let's welcome Sally to host the rest of the Ideas Lab. Sally is a futures literacy designer and a facilitator at UNESCO. So Sally, it's your time.
Thank you, Jinxia. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm joining you from Paris, France, but it's lovely to see everyone. Is it possible that I share screen, or
yeah.
do you have the slides? Are there?
You can share yourself.
I'm not able to share if someone else is sharing. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Again, hello, everyone. Good morning, but good afternoon to you. My name is Sally. I'm a futures literacy designer and facilitator at UNESCO, Social and Human Sciences. And in Chinese, it's 未来素养. So we'll be chatting with you a little bit about what is futures literacy. I'd like to begin my part just with a few observations about the world, the universe around us. And then we'll dive into what is futures literacy and what are futures literacy laboratories. And I apologize for the yellow tint on my face. It's pretty dark over here in the mornings. So if you look around you, actually, let's return to the slide. If you look around you, what do you see? Maybe some new dirty dishes, a few clothing items folded differently. Perhaps you purchased a new book without finishing the one before. The point is, change is happening around us all the time. Sometimes it's more noticeable. It's rather disruptive, like the pandemic, like our experiences with COVID-19. Or sometimes it's less noticeable, such as when things change around us only a little bit, when we get maybe a new idea from a book or from someone we were speaking to. That type of change is happening, but sometimes less noticeable. Which brings me to my point. The first one is that change is the only constant. We live in a world that is constantly changing, whether or not we notice it. When there's a lot of change happening very quickly, or happening a lot at the same time, or rather, this is an observation about the world that is around us all the time. Change is happening constantly and all the time. It becomes complex. And we have a curious relationship to complexity. We sometimes see complexity as a bad thing. If you take wicked problems, for example, we call it wicked problems because it's wicked. It's so complex that it's evil, it's bad, and oh my gosh, we need to do something about eliminating all of these problems. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't solve the problems in the world and make the world a better place, but how we frame this question is curious. And I would like to offer an observation that complexity is not bad. It's not inherently bad. And to frame it as something wicked is seeing it in a way that we try to reduce outliers, reduce new creative moments around us. We should instead see complexity as something that offers us innovation, creativity, emergence around us. And actually, it's an opportunity for us to harness that creativity and that innovation, and not see it as something that we need to eliminate. When we add the element of time to complexity and change, or complex changes that's occurring around us, and when we try to know what this looks like in a time in the future, that is called anticipation. So anticipation are all of these efforts to know the future. And it was really exciting to hear Qingxia explain some of these ways and approaches to know the future. Speculative design futures. There are different methodologies out there, from strategic foresight to strategic planning, studying megatrends, so on and so forth. All of this is grounded in our anticipation. We can develop more complex tools for looking at the future, or we can do so with our imagination, but all of it is anticipation. And this is quite useful in telling us what the future looks like from a present, or rather past perspective, in the sense that when we try to do a forecast, we use data, right? But where does this data come from? It comes from either the present or it comes from the past. So in a way, we're projecting this data onto the future, which is really interesting because it paints a specific picture of what that future looks like. That can be quite useful to help guide us. But something else to consider is also, you'll notice many efforts to know the future is goal-oriented. We want to, again, solve a particular problem. We have a goal in mind, and that's neither a good or bad thing, just an observation that it's goal-oriented. The thing is, though, it sort of limits us in a way in that we're self-imposing on how we can think about the future. What if we didn't just have a goal in mind? What if we were open to emergence when we thought about the future? And this is something that Futures Literacy is trying to add to all the ways we are thinking about the future, is to look at anticipation for emergence and hold this space for reflection about what the future could look like if there was not such goals, if we were introduced to various possibilities around us because of the complex change that is emerging, and then to be able to reassess, are these things continue to be important for us? Are these goals still important for us? It provides us the opportunity of clarity to understand our values and why and how we know the future. And that brings us to the point that Futures Literacy is a capability. Why do we take a capability approach to the future? Well, I'll offer you a simple analogy. Think about this. We can either have someone give us a piece of fish and we'll be fed for the day or for the afternoon, or you can learn how to fish and you'll be able to feed yourself for a lifetime. Would you prefer one or the other? I suspect we'll all say the latter, which is to be able to learn how to fish so we can feed ourselves for a lifetime. And that's why Futures Literacy is a capability. If we learn to understand why we are using certain reference points, we call them anticipatory assumptions in a more technical word, why we're using certain frames, certain lenses to imagine the future, where we're getting these images, these sources from, becoming better at understanding our own anticipatory systems and processes, we become better at using the future, and we're able to use the future in the present. So when we are futures literate, then we become able to continually invent new images of the future in a way that matches, or in a way that puts us in harmony with our complex and changing world. We're more open to everything that is emergent, constantly changing, and taking, we are then able to harness that creativity, the innovation that is occurring around us all the time. And anyone can do it because it is based on the power of our imagination, right? This is something that can be practiced and cultivated. And maybe I'll draw your attention to the Chinese translation on the emphasis of the literacy part being 素养. 素养 implies that this is more than just a know-how. It's more than just knowing, hold the scissors this way and cut across the paper. It's something that requires cultivation, that requires sustained practice to get better at. And in a way, it offers us an approach to understanding anticipation and understanding the different ways in which we use futures, including the former methodologies that were mentioned. And so really, it's a way that it's complementary. We'll dive into also a little bit around the practicals. How does one then learn futures literacy laboratories? Futures literacy. This is through futures literacy laboratories. The reason it's framed as a lab is because we want this to be a space where people can experiment, be creative, be playful, but also be able to dive into topics that they care about. So we've done labs on the future of trust with equity deserving communities. We do labs on the future of education, the future of youth rethinking well-being. This was done in Egypt. So all around the world, futures literacy laboratories are being run, tackling different topics. And one thing that they do have in common is the different phases that participants are often taken through. Phase 1 is known as reveal, so going from tacit to explicit. We look at our probable and our preferred futures to understand what do we think is most likely to happen and what would we desire to happen. I'm going to take a pause here because actually, if you've been answering the questions on the whiteboard, we'll be taking a look at those and seeing what you've come up with for your probable and preferred futures. And I wonder, Menjan, would you be able to share your screen? Are you able to access it?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, Sally, I cannot do that.
That's all good.
If someone else can, that would be great.
That's all good.
Okay, wait a moment. Oh,
Thanks, Qingxia. Maybe as Qingxia is getting the slides going, we did get a few answers prior to today's live broadcast. So just offering you a few pieces of thought in the way we think in terms of education. One thing that really stuck to my memory was how we saw the future of learning in 2050 being inseparable, always linked to an educator, right? To someone who would then teach us. So teaching and learning in a way goes hand in hand together. Something else that we also saw with learning is the use of technology around us. Technology being a function to be able to aid us in the way that we're learning, to help the way we approach education. But at the same time, flagging something quite important that at the end of the day, it's important to remember it's about learning. Even though we have these technologies to help us learn, that people ultimately still need to be motivated, to be curious about what they're learning and to be willing to do so. And so that points to a few assumptions that we have. The first one being that our ideas of learning in the future is tied to an educator. And this is likely because we're in school and we always have professors and teachers around us to help guide us. And so we take this assumption and we put it to the future. Again, there are like absolutely no right or wrong answers in this setting, just explaining to you sort of the few observations that we're making. The other thing around education is technology, right? How technology will help us, but also not letting it be sort of a distraction. Technology is so prevalent around us in all these different forms. So it's not possible that we are not thinking about it, right? We're necessarily thinking about it. Oh, Ting, I was actually wondering if we could do the whiteboard, the whiteboard to look at. Coming back to
Yes, no problem.
thank
It's
you.
fine.
So coming back to these assumptions, it just goes to show that we use reference points around us, what we're familiar with when we imagine the future. We necessarily have to have a few reference points. Otherwise, if we say that the future is far too far off, like 2200, we don't really see ourselves being implicated in it. And so everything that is familiar to us is sort of gone, and we're not really able to see any further. Actually, I think it should be okay. Just in the interest of time, I'll just move ahead. So thank you so much. If we look at the next phase of the Futures Literacy Lab, this one is around reframe. So we actually want to disconnect from existing anticipatory assumptions. So the ones that I just mentioned, the idea that learning has to be tied to technology, for example, as an aid, what if we removed it? What if we were put into a space that was rather strange, bizarre, and quite unfamiliar to us? How can we invent new anticipatory assumptions, new lenses, new frames of reference to imagine the future? That's really exciting because it allows us to use the future to imagine the future. Sounds a little bit meta, doesn't it? But what if we were able to put down just for a moment, we'll go back to it, but just for a moment, the present and the past in the way it shapes the way we think, and actually use the future. When we come back to the present, which is in phase 3, we're then able to compare these different exercises that we've done, the different futures that we looked at, to consolidate our learning and to be able to reflect on actually what were these frames that I used? What did it mean for me to talk about these issues? What was important to me that stayed important, or was there something that changed? So this is the point I mentioned earlier around it's okay for us to have goals when we're imagining the future, but let's take a moment to really dive into it, to be able to reflect on it and question the values behind why we set these goals and to see if it stays important for us. It offers that piece of clarity. And phase 4 is something that we co-design. All of this is what we co-design with our, what we call local champions, our partners. And phase 4 for next steps is to connect these learnings to what we do now. And again, the emphasis around futures literacy is that we want to be able to help participants and to allow participants to see themselves change in the conditions of change, which is to say that if we're only using the same reference points to imagine the future, we're not necessarily changing the conditions of the change. We're asking for change, but not the nature of which it occurs. And by going through a reframe scenario, it offers that possibility. It expands our horizon of possible choices that we can take. And for these reframes, by the way, it's not to say we have to act on them or not act on them. It's about offering broader and more diverse perspectives. So there have been nearly 100 Futures Literacy Lab held around the world. It's actually about 15 plus now in Asia and the Pacific. So my image is a little bit out of date, which is quite exciting because it demonstrates that there is quite the growing interest in the region in looking at different ways of thinking about the future and the diverse approaches there is to futures. And if you're curious to learn a bit more, there's also the text Transforming the Future that is online on the UNESCO website, both in English, French, and Arabic that's been published. And soon we will have a Spanish and Chinese translation, which is being done by our partners at the China Academy of Arts in Hangzhou. There are also, I believe, nearly 32 UNESCO chairs in anticipation, future studies and futures literacy all around the world. And this just wanting to show you that how diverse the application of futures literacy is. It's a form of inviting people to participate in the way they think about the future. So it's a participatory process, but also one that is applicable across many diverse subjects, themes, topics, and sectors. So you have, anticipatory governance and regenerative cities. You have futures of education, resilience leadership, so on and so forth. So thank you so much. I will stop here now for me. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to y.lin@unesco.org. I also have my social media, though I'm afraid I'm not frequently on it. So the best way to reach me will be through the UNESCO email. And in this exciting moment, I would love to turn it over to our speakers, Manjiang He, followed by Sebastian Plate, and then you'll hear a word from Dr. John A. Sweeney, and of course, Dr. Nurani Rama Hanifa. They are futurists, researchers, futures literacy practitioners, and facilitators and co-designers in futures literacy laboratories. And they will be sharing with you their learning journey, how they engaged with it, and some of the design challenges that came up for them and how they approached it. So you get to see some tangible examples to the labs as well. Thank you so much. And over to Manjiang.
Oh, thank you, Sally. I'll share my screen now. Give me one moment. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, no problem.
Oh. One second. Oh, I'm very sorry. I cannot go back to. Oh, oops. Okay. Sorry, I have some technical.
Would you like
issues.
me
Just give
to share the screen for you?
Yeah, that'd be great. It seems there's some problem with it. I will stop sharing. Thank you, Sally. Is it finalized version? Yep. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Manjiang, and I'm joining you from Shanghai. So it is my great pleasure to speak here today and share my experience of the project Futuring Peace in Northeast Asia by using future literacy with you. Next slide, please, Sally. Yes, so before I start sharing the project that I participated, I want to say something about future literacy itself. So future literacy is probably a new concept to many of you. So was I. So it was until several months ago that I got to know this concept. But as I knew more about this concept, about future literacy, I found it's actually something that every one of us is familiar with, even when we're a child. So you were probably asked by your teacher or parent, what do you want to be in the future? You also probably imagined what a future you will look like, just as shown in the picture. The current me is, for example, oversleeping, spending too much time on phone, and there's an imagined future me who is disciplined, self-motivated, and proactive. So the process of envisioning a future you is actually one piece of future literacy. So, however, why we're using future literacy here? Why shouldn't we just call it imagination? So besides imagine yourself in 10 years or 20 years, what else we can do by using future literacy? So this is something I want to share today. Next slide, please, Sally. So I will start with the project background, then talk through the future literacy journey, and what youth in this region, in Northeast Asia envisioned future in 2060. And then I will talk about the challenges along process. Finally, I will share my personal learnings and reflections. So the guiding challenge questions can be asked is, when youth use their imagination for future, what could the outcome be? How do youth from Northeast Asia envision the probable and preferred, as well as the reframed future of this region? And how do we reframe the imagined future and use the future literacy to empower our thoughts and actions today? Next, please. So regarding the project background, Future and Peace in Northeast Asia is a project brought together by UNESCO and UNDPPA. UNDPPA is a United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Basically, it's an UN organization aims to promote peace building. Particularly, this project is under Youth, Peace and Security, YPS agenda. Basically, this YPS agenda highlighted the role and power of youth in peace building. As a UNESCO, as you already heard from Sally, that has been championed future literacy long time ago. If I remember correctly, it's since 2012. So the two organizations collaborated with each other and combined youth and future literacy together. So since June this year, we started this project and had more than 40 young people from China, Japan, South Korea, and Mongolia participated in this project. We aimed to empower Northeast Asian youth and convene a series of virtual dialogues with them on the future of their region. My role in this project is a co-designer and also a group facilitator. And of course, I'm also youth from this region. Next, please. So the process of this project can be actually divided into 3 steps. So in end of May, we started off this project by conducting 3 intensive training of future literacy within 3 days. Basically, if we, as a group of young people from Northeast Asia, the co-designers and facilitators should be trained ourselves to know about future literacy so that we can be the agent to enable wider youth community from this region. So in June, it was a time when we co-designed the program, we addressed the questions, who are going to participate, how we going to attract them into this program, and how we process these dialogues, who should be involved in, and what and how we're going to discuss the futures of Northeast Asia. So after addressing these questions, on 27th of July, we held the first future dialogue where we discussed about probable future and preferred future. And based on the first dialogue, on 6th of October, we had the second dialogue where we focused on the concept of reframed future. Basically, we asked 5 W questions, what, who, when, where, and why, to guide participants to think and imagine the reframed future, and also kind of reverse the sequence of thinking that we had in the first dialogue. And on 27th of October, we had the last dialogue. It was a time when we established a platform where the youth and policymakers in this region were brought together and bridged the communication gap in between them that we usually discuss. The young people have no channel or platform to talk to the policymaker, while in the third dialogue, we build such platform so that they can communicate with each other and know what they are thinking about from each other's perspective. Next, please. So the process looks like a bit quite intensive. So what young people envisioned future of Northeast Asia in 2060? we had a very diverse group of people. So as you can see, the discussion was very dynamic and touched many issues from different dimensions. So a group of participants brainstormed the future of intergeneration relations. Basically, the main question that was explored is how the two generations, the young generation and old generation, would interact with each other in 2060. So it was a mix of it can be cooperation as well as conflict. And my group is group 2. We mainly focused on the issue of intergenerational care and transformation of education under the broader context of Asian society in Northeast Asia in 2060. So we questioned if, as a society, as we can feel that in China, in Japan, as well as in South Korea, our society is Asian. So under this context, we questioned who should take the responsibility of childcare and elder care. Is the government responsibility, or the young generation should bear the burden? Or in 2060, where there will be a new agent to deal with it. We also envisioned the transformation of education, as Sally mentioned. Some participants talk about how the education of future should look like. It's a connection with educators and learners, and also how we harness the power of technology to transform education. So in my group, we also talk about education and its transformation. Especially, we stress the point that in 2060, the curiosity should be the fundamental driver of studying and learning, rather than utilitarian basis. And educational opportunity is not only for the young, for the children, but also for the old. The education and learning should be accessible for all ages, and it's a lifelong process. And of course, and in other groups of participants, they also look at the climate change issues. Imagine that in the future, the concept of wealth and value may shift from the economic value to environmental value. And participants also thought about the future of youth engaged in politics and in decision making. And of course, the regionality of Northeast Asia was also an important component of this dialogue. Next, please. So I have to admit that there were quite a few challenges in processing the future dialogues, both for facilitators and participants. Technically, given the constraint of the pandemic, we could only conduct the future workshops online. And you can imagine that it is very hard to make people concentrate on a virtual workshops for 3 hours. So as facilitators, you need to keep energizing participants at the same time, because we had so many things to cover in 3 hours. So it was very easy to go over time. You need to manage time well. And of course, we also need to ensure that online platform and internet work during the process. It happens often that there was tech issue that you cannot use certain platform. But probably what was more difficult for facilitators are group discussion management, by which I mean, for facilitators, for me, I need to balance between the freedom of imagination and centralizing thoughts, because when we talk about future, there's so many things to talk about, right? And so many things, different topics, issues to cover, and also nobody knows what will happen in the future. Therefore, in the first dialogue, we very obviously feel that the discussion was very wide and diverse, and it kind of loose as well. So usually we need to ask ourselves, the question is where the discussion will lead us, or compare with what do we want the discussion to lead us. So you have to balance between these two things constantly. And also, again, when we think about future, it was a world future full of uncertainties. So we need to push ourselves as well as the participant to think out of box and to think creatively. That is something is actually very hard to do. because creativity is something, it's not something that you just tell them, okay, just think out of box, but you need to show how to think in that way. That is something I find is actually you need to improve little by little, and it takes time to allow the participants to think in a different way that is different from today at least. So for participants, it was also challenging because they're from very diverse background. People usually have different level of different comfort level of sharing. Some of them may take efforts to engage into the discussion, and often they feel confused. And also as facilitators, we also feel confused because, which is normal, because we're talking about future. Nobody knows what will happen. It's a world of full of uncertainties and bizarreness. But at the same time, we can also feel they have a lot of hunger for deep discussion, the knowledge of future, and they want to know more. Next, please. So having said so many things, lastly, I want to talk about my personal reflections and learning after this process. So the core question to answer is, why future literacy, why we need it, and why it is relevant to us? There are 3 points, I think. The first is, I believe future literacy is a useful and multifunctional tool that you can apply in various situations and topics and empower you with the capacity, as Sally mentioned, is a capacity to think about the future. I think it is meaningful to compare history literacy and future literacy. See, in our school time, we had a subject called history, where we learned about the past of China and the past of the world. So there's also a famous old saying, 学史可以明志, history makes man wise, because only if when we know what happened in the past, so that we can understand what is happening today. Similarly, when we envision the future, although we don't know what exactly will happen, but our envision and desire for a desirable future will guide our actions today. So future literacy is multifunctional, is because literally it can be used in different fields. For example, in my case, we talk about the peace and future in Northeast Asia region as a region. It can also be the future of disaster reduction, which Rahama will share with you soon, and many other topics that the speakers will talk as well. So it literally can be anything. So it's a capacity and is as well as a multifunctional tool. Second, in my view, future literacy is also a logic sharpener that allows you to think out of box and create creatively. So it is because exactly nobody knows what will happen in the future. So there's no limit of your imagination. You are in a world where you can think whatever you want, to think something never happened, never exists today. So it is a situation, it is a space that you can think whatever you want. That is something a lot of times we feel constrained if we don't think the future, but think about what is happening now, what is the constraints, what are the risks that you may face that can limit your imagination, can limit your thoughts of the future. And third, I believe future literacy is a source of mental power. We had a discussion in the last dialogue that we asked the participants how they feel before and after the future dialogue. So a lot of them talk about they feel more optimistic about the future and also think they are capable and they can have positive impact on the community. So I think I personally feel the same. I think it's not something out of nowhere or it's a coincidence. I think it's because from this process of talking about future, imagine the future, that we know the probable future, the preferred future, as well as the reframed future, which gives us the strength and confidence to know what we want in the future, what we can do today, and how we can make a better future to happen by our efforts, collective efforts, and policies and measures. Lastly, last slide, please. Next, please. So I want to end with this cartoon picture. The two cartoon figures are arguing with each other, one saying that the future will be great, and another said the future will be awful. And there's someone else saying the future does not care what you think, but I believe that the future does care what you think. Because if nobody cares, how can we ever live in a world that we want to live? And where does the hope come from if nobody cares about the future will happen? So that's all for my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjun. That was so lovely to hear from you and to get to hear about what you did with peace building in Northeast Asia and looking at the future of peace. And I just want to draw the connection that you made also with connecting what your group discussed around lifelong learning and education, and how it can go in two ways and everyone can share that learning together as a realization that came after the reframe to what our audience today looked at for the future of learning in 2050 also. So we see sort of like noticeably a difference in the way that people approach education and learning. And again, that's the value of what the holding the reframe space offers, is just letting them explore these different possibilities, different perspectives. Next, I would like to invite Sebastian Plate to share his screen. I believe, Sebastian, you're joining us from Berlin today.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Sally. And also thank you to Xinjia and Manjang for this very nice presentations. I really enjoyed it. Good morning from my side from Berlin, and what looks to be a very gray and quiet Sunday. So good afternoon to you. I'm trying to share my screen now. I hope this works. If you can all see and hear me. And also I think that what I'm going to talk about today relates a lot to what Sally and Manjang have said, because I try to talk about the question of, are we forced to become futures literate? And then in that way, talk about the acceleration of the capability in a changing world. Hereby, I want to go into more of a design perspective because I am a futures literacy designer and practitioner and a researcher for foresight and anticipation in Berlin. And hereby, I want to go into the design of futures literacy laboratories, of what Sally has also talked about, and more from the perspective of the beginning of the beginning of the design process, and also what we try to get out of the audience, how we try to frame those labs, and what role we take as facilitators, and what role the participants are supposed to take. First of all, I want to start off with a quote that is you all can read. Once you're able to read, you cannot unread. I heard Rio Miller from UNESCO say that last week at a conference, and it kind of marinated in my head, and it really resonated with me, because it's something that I see in connection to futures literacy. So once the capability grows in your mind, it can't really be stopped. So it's much like reading. You become literate in a way. But the question I want to ask now is that to myself, am I really literate, or am I really futures literate? So generally you would say, yes, you are literate. I can read, I can write. I'm able to do these things, so I cannot undo them anymore. But say if I ever get the chance, I've never been, But if I ever get the chance to go to Beijing, am I still a literate person? Because if no one is so kind as to speak the language I speak, I'm not able to communicate with anyone. I'm not able to read road signs. I'm not able to go to a library and yeah, read a book or something like this. So then the question becomes, okay, am I really a literate person? So that's also what I want to go into, because as you can see, this empty library on the right here. With Futures Literacy, we try to explore this emptiness. We try to explore the gaps between literacy and illiteracy. So first of all, when we think about the future, we often try to predict things like the weather. We try to dream big, have long-term dreams. But we also fear things that might be immovable in the future, that are very likely and very probable going to happen. And that's how we approach design as well. We design in order to plan. We plan things, we predict things like the weather. So we're going to take an umbrella when it's going to rain. We organize things, and for example, this example of your fridge, we organize our food to be there when we want to eat, and that enables us and also forces us to make decisions. So we have to take a direction in order to move somewhere. What Futures Literacy does is that we try to see this balance between the two of them. We try to explore the gaps between designing and planning. How do we design for the future? How do we design for emergence? We try to see the gaps between dreaming and predicting, between desirable futures and probable futures. And we also think about the future and emergence. So how do we approach the future, and how do we approach things that are uncertain and that we cannot prepare for? So exploring the gaps, exploring the in-between. In designing a Futures Literacy laboratory, the audience is a really important factor. So in my experience, there are always two kinds of audiences in a way, if you want to generalize, and one of them is where you design for a purpose. So those kind of target audiences are mostly market-driven organizations and collective entities, management levels, more of a corporate context and collective context, where they are really focused on, okay, what is the purpose of this laboratory? It is action-oriented. It should be foresight-focused. So I should be able to plan what comes out of it. I should be able to know in advance what comes out of it. And in the end, we'll have closure when we have more action-oriented approaches. So in Futures Literacy, as you've seen from the previous presentations, these things are very difficult, because we try to design for emergence. That means that we imply that you cannot know the future, and that we imply that you have to be emergent, and you have to design for emergence. So the other target audiences are more singular entities, much like artists, students, startups, interested individuals who try to look for an experience in a Futures Literacy lab by being playful, being imaginative, exploring the future together in desirable, probable, but most of all alternative futures, and thereby digesting some of the assumptions we have about the present. And most importantly, in the end, we don't try to end with an action-oriented approach. So this is what I can do, A, B, C. No, but we try to end with a question, and those questions can then sparkle new imaginations, and then you can approach the future in an explorative and playful way. So these two strings are related to the anticipating the future and anticipating emergence. So we try to design on the one hand where we predict something, we dream about something, we plan something, and then we reveal futures. And on the other hand, we also try to anticipate for emergence. I mean, if you only anticipate for the future, how can you react to something that is unforeseen, that is something that makes you reframe your own thinking? The very obviously most popular example is the pandemic. If you would have asked somebody in 2019 to predict the year of 2020, you probably wouldn't have got the right future there from the predictions of those people. So we need both in order to think about the future and think about the present. We try to, in anticipating for emergence, we try to rethink the assumptions we have. We try to redo things and then reflect again to asking questions instead of giving answers. Here I put a few assumptions I think I have had during my studies, and I think most students have in the world. Because when we apply futures literacy in design, we do not try to neglect planning, dreaming, and predicting, but we only engage with the future by unpacking our assumptions. So it's the balance between anticipating for the future and anticipating for emergence. One assumption, to give an example that I used to have when I was studying, is that education enables me to be successful. Looking for a job afterwards made me realize that, okay, yes, I may have the ticket, but I don't have the necessary experience that is most often the most valuable asset when finding a job. So you tend to question of why you actually studied and didn't get work experience. So there's a huge gap there, and that showed me that there was a big assumption there. The second assumption is what I think when we really think about designing and planning and dreaming and predicting, is that we know the future. All we have to do is go there. So we design it because we know what's going to happen. We assume that technology is going to get bigger. Those trends that we see now are going to grow, or things like that are going to grow. But aren't we missing something there? Aren't we looking into something that is? Aren't we missing the total perspective? Are we not really colonizing? Aren't we more solution oriented there? That is the question that assumptions can really bring about if you unpack them. So there's this metaphor of walking on two legs. So finding the balance between anticipating for the future and anticipating for emergence. And in a very practical way, how do we apply these things in futures literacy laboratories is through collective intelligence knowledge creation. And this collective intelligence knowledge creation is really to me the most fun part about a futures literacy laboratory, because there are three things I like personally. I like the most about it, because the first one is we get rid of the expertise. So most of you know that people are experts in everything. But if we talk about the future, the expertise goes away. So if you ask somebody about the future of the work in the year 2050, 2070, whatever it may be, nobody can be an expert in this because we do not know the future. Again, the example of the pandemic has really accelerated this and showed us that we are not able to plan, and we are not able to predict the future. So we get rid of the expertise, and that's why it's very liberating to be in a futures literacy lab, because nobody is an expert. Everybody is equal. We can be very collective, and we can talk about knowledge in a way that is open and that is imaginative and playful, and therefore it has no constraints. The second thing is that participants are the center of the knowledge creation. Me as a facilitator, as a moderator of a futures literacy lab, I am forced to be stepping in to step into the back of I'm not the center of attention anymore, because participants are. They are the ones that create the knowledge together. They are the ones that ask these questions, and they are the ones that come up with new insights, with new questions and new actions. And we as facilitators only try to get them in order to question their assumptions, question the answers they give, and question how they think about the present and the future. What I've already mentioned is finding the balance between literacy and illiteracy. So we try to balance both things in order to explore the gaps, the in-between, and in order to more so think about the present than the future. So to sum up, there were 5 points that I went into and that I wanted to go into. The first one is futures literacy enables us to look at the gaps, the in-between. So what I just said, we try to see literacy and illiteracy as a journey. We don't see literacy as a destination. We don't see being futures literate as something we have to be, and then we have finally mastered our perfect solution about being futures literate, and then everything will fall into its place. No, it is the journey that we take there in order to look at our present and find assumptions, find new questions, find different types of emergence, different types of futures, and then explore them. So the metaphor of walking on two legs is the second one, where we anticipate for the future and anticipate for emergence. We plan, we predict, we dream, but we also rethink, we redo, we reflect, we reframe. So both things are really important, and that is what futures literacy connects. The third thing, and very personal for me, designing for an audience. This is the most important thing in a futures designing a futures literacy laboratory. Who are you going to do this for? What do they want to get out of it? Will they be thrown off if it's too much emergence, the one leg, or will they be bored if it's too much thinking about the future and in a foresight way? We try to digest assumptions by not looking too much into the future, but into our present. So, and we can maybe some people can argue about this, but futures literacy is essentially more about the present. So we try to look at the present differently in order so we are aware that we can create the future. And then last, but also most importantly, futures literacy. That's why it's called futures literacy. It's the plural. We are looking at futures and not just a future. There are many possible futures. There are many futures we do not see, many futures we can predict, but we are able to create the future, and we are able to create this literacy within us. So at last, are we forcing ourselves to become futures literate? This is really a reformulation of the question I've had in the beginning, because if you expect an answer here, I'm trying to anticipate for emergence. So I'm trying to end with this question and let that kind of resonate with you a bit. So can we use the future in the present? That is the question of literacy and illiteracy, where are we able to explore this emptiness? Are we able to explore the gaps? Are we able to explore the cracks, the in-between? And this is what we try to do in Futures Literacy Laboratories, the methodology of futures literacy. Thank you very much. This is my first.
Thanks, Sebastian. So lovely to hear from you, your own assumptions as well. I think this offers something that all of our audience can relate to, having all been students at one point or another, how we view the world at that time. And also, again, what you highlight around the complementarity of anticipation for the future and anticipation for emergence is very valuable, because it shows that all efforts to know the future, which is rooted in anticipation, have their use and their function for their specific context and time. And FL trying to push us a bit further towards anticipation for emergence, and also the importance of co-design. Wonderful. So now we have thank you so much. Now we have a speaker, Dr. John A. Sweeney. He was not able to join us live today, but he did pre-record his intervention. So I will be sharing that with you to play it. I will play it for a few moments. Please let me know if you can hear the sound, and if not, we will pause to adjust.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry to not be able to be with you today. I'm actually recording this from an airport, and then we'll also be flying out tomorrow. So very sorry not to be with you. I am excited, however, to share a little bit about my work and my research on participatory futures. And so today I'll be talking about how can we imagine more participatory futures, but I'm also interested in how these participatory futures are being put into practice. I'm very interested in how, of course, this ties into the concept of futures literacy and, of course, the Futures Literacy Lab framework. And so what I would like to do today is to present to you some of the core ideas of participatory futures, have you look at some examples, and again, really would love to hopefully add to the conversation that you're having. So I'm a co-founder of something called the Participatory Futures Global Swarm. The Global Swarm was created to do research in this area, but also as we found out that we really ended up creating a community. Now, that community is quite global and quite diverse because the founders of the swarm are also quite diverse and quite global as well. So we come from different geographies, different cultures. Many of us speak different languages and actually have different professions. So we have futurists, we have researchers, we have designers, we have artists, we have strategists. We have a number of different people working together to have different and better conversations about how we can make futures processes more participatory. And so for us, really, the aim of futures is to have it be an engaged discipline and practice. Of course, not just to simply imagine these futures, but really to enact a better future. And I think this ties in directly to the concept of futures literacy as a capability, as something that we put into practice, that we do, that does actually have an effect on our lives, and of course can have an effect across society and across organizations more broadly. I think that one of the challenges of exactly what organizations trying to use more participatory futures processes and methods is to break out of this idea of the eternal present. Most organizations and institutions are just stuck. They're stuck in a reactive mode. They don't know how to be anticipatory because there's no capability. There's no language set, right? There's no conceptual framework to be able to help them understand how they might be able to use the future. And again, this is where I think futures literacy has a lot of value as an approach, but also how do we make those processes more participatory? And so the Swarm did research a few years ago, and we found 300 examples of these participatory approaches from all over the world. Of course, many of these were actually futures literacy labs, so engagements where, of course, a diverse group of people came together to participate, some in person, some online, to be able to explore the future. And I know you've heard a bit about sort of that approach from others here. So what I wanted to do was talk about some of the types of approaches that might be taken if you wanted to use more participatory tools and methods. Of course, one of the things that I like most about the Futures Literacy Lab model is the reframe. And the reframe is really all about immersing people. And so this was actually an approach that we saw very strongly. The idea of actually exploring the future through immersive physical or virtual environments. Of course, there's a bit of role play, there's a bit of theater involved. And the example here is actually from a colleague in Canada who created a fictional company from the future, a company that did genetic engineering. And this was part of his master's program at the Ontario College of Art and Design. And so what he was able to do was not just to have people think about the future, but they got to feel the future. And this is the value of using immersive approaches for participatory futures. Another example, of course, would be the Futures Literacy Lab model, which does a lot of sense making. It can engage people to come together and have more dynamic conversations about the future. And I understand you're hearing about the Futures of Disaster Risk Governance project already, and the kinds of ways that this was able to bring people together to think about the future and to explore, again, how the future is shaping the kinds of choices, the kinds of things we're seeing, the kinds of things that we even want and hope for today. Now, in relation to design more specifically, one of the approaches that we saw that was being used quite widely was the approach of create. So either creating things or objects from the future, having people create those things or objects. And this is a project that a colleague did with the BBC, where they asked people to bring everyday things from their home, and then they were turned into artifacts or objects from the future. The idea of this really is, how do we take the familiar and make it strange? Or how do we take the strange and make it familiar? And so this is a really interesting participatory futures process because it really challenges people to, again, connect with sometimes the everyday things that we take for granted, and to use that as a way, of course, of reframing our perspective on the future. And so this was actually a sort of a bazaar, a large sort of sale that was put together where people were selling these objects from the future. And it was a way, again, of having a different conversation, but also, creating different feelings about the future. Of course, futures has impact when it ties into decision making, when it's shaping policy, planning, or strategy. And so there are a rich number of examples that look at how do participatory futures processes actually help people make decisions and deliberate. And so a number of years ago, the Constitution of Mexico City needed an update. And what the government was able to organize with the help of civil society was a very large-scale participatory process that had workshops, it had surveys, it had an online platform. It was really about trying to bring people together. And when a number of people voted for something or had the chance to give input, it automatically moved in as part of the process. It moved up, if you will, to decision makers. So this was really about enabling people to come together and share ideas. And again, sharing it across the city, so not everyone had to be together in the same place at the same time. And that's one example. Of course, art and more aesthetic practices can be used as well. And finally, this is one that I use quite a lot in my own work. This is play. I love games and simulations. I think they're very helpful for reframing, but also they're helpful for exploring uncertainty. Uncertainty is, of course, at the heart of futures and the processes by which we need to become more futures literate. And when I say at the heart of those processes, the future is fundamentally uncertain. But that's a good thing. The fact that the future is undetermined, the fact that the future is unknown, even though there are many forces that are shaping and driving the future that we can see and feel today, we want the future to be uncertain, because if the future is not uncertain, that means it's determined. That means the future can't be changed. That means that ultimately we're stuck in a very sort of risk management mindset. Whereas we don't have the power and the agency and the capability to see the future as something that's emergent. And so I think that's where the power of futures literacy comes in, is it reminds us that the future is uncertain. It does help us understand how we should not get trapped into those other types of mindsets. And we have to embrace that uncertainty. And of course, the reason we embrace that uncertainty is we are working more broadly to help create a better future for all. Now, I mentioned these 5, but they really come together actually, and there are many hybrid approaches. And so the idea of a hybrid approach of this would be blending one or 2 or more, like putting them all together. And what this really does is this creates learning and fosters further explorations. So one example is when I was working at the International Red Cross Red Crescent. I was the Global Futures and Foresight Coordinator, and it's the largest humanitarian organization in the world. So what we had to organize was a way of getting input from around 11 million volunteers. And of course, that's extraordinarily difficult. And the organization had used lots of surveys and workshops before. And so what we were able to organize with a partner, Newcastle University, was a game about the future that you could play on WhatsApp. And this allowed over 4,000 people in over 120 countries to give their perspective on the future. What were their hopes? What were their dreams? How did they see the organization moving into the future? And that created so much learning. So, when I think about the future of learning, when I think about how we're going to create more collective intelligence in the future, I think it's going to be through processes like Futures Literacy Labs. I think it's going to be through media like games, played in simulations or immersive experiences and played in different environments. And maybe that is in something like WhatsApp, or maybe, of course, it's in a new platform or a new sort of medium or space of technology. And again, I think the value here is to say, how can we create more spaces for more people to think about how they use the future, and how the future, of course, is is acting as a force on the present and shaping what we see as possible now, and of course, shaping even what we want for the future now. And so for me, futures literacy is a pathway for learning. It takes us beyond our individual point of view. It takes us into unknown places through new framings and through reframing. And ultimately, I think by helping us understand how we can use the future, I think it does take us towards better futures for all. Thank you so much. Again, my apologies for not being able to join you directly. Really excited to have the chance to engage, and best wishes for a successful event. Thank you so much.
All right, folks, and that was John Sweeney. Again, he sends his regrets for not being able to be with us live here today. He's actually on a plane as we speak, so we can imagine why it might be a bit difficult to join a live broadcast. But wanted to emphasize again one thing that John has said in his talk that links together with what our two other speakers have already mentioned, this idea around futures being participatory, as an emphasis made by different futures practitioners, but also in the futures literacy laboratories, is this idea of collective intelligence, knowledge creation. Simply put, having more brains to think together is better than thinking just with one brain. You get more diverse perspectives, more ideas, you get to collaborate together to think about shared meaning and what this future could look like. And it works really well because, again, the future is not knowable. And so the only way the future exists in the present, or the only way we're able to think about the future, is through our imaginations, whether all these different, through these different approaches to the futures. And again, the value being coming together, sharing what we know together, negotiating that shared meaning, what this common future looks like through a participatory manner. And of course, last but not least, I'd like to invite Dr. Rahma Hanifa to share with us her presentation and her experience working with UNDRR. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sally. Dajiaho. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here to this event on future literacy, and I really much enjoy all the presentation by all the speakers and moderator about the future literacy lab. So allow me to share my screen. Can you see the slide?
Yep.
So my name is Rahma Hanifa, and I'm joining from Indonesia. Greeting from Indonesia here. I will talk about my experience together with other colleagues. We developed this slide together with Dr. Iva Farhana, which is also here. On reframing the RR future thinking in 2045 from youth and young professionals' perspective. I think I really agree with previous speakers that the most interesting part of Future Literacy Lab is actually the reframing process, and that's why we put reframing as the title. We also acknowledge this initiative as part of collaboration with UNESCO FLL Paris Headquarters, UNESCO Jakarta Office for Asia Pacific, UNDRR Regional Office for Asia Pacific, UNDP Accelerator Lab, and UInspire Alliance. I currently the Secretary General of UInspire Alliance, and I am a researcher in the Research Center for Geotechnology of the National Innovation and Research Agency of Indonesia. So UInspire Alliance is an alliance of youth and young professionals working to support disaster risk reduction. Currently, we have 12 chapters with close to 1,000 members. We also have a chapter in China we call Huaxia chapters. Our vision is to have a powerful collaboration platform for empowering youth and young professionals in disaster risk reduction, focusing on linking to policy at local, national, and global level. So why do we see the importance on thinking about DRR, Future Literacy Lab in DRR? We just had our International Day for Tsunami Awareness Day in 5th November, and in October we had the International Disaster Risk Reduction. So we had several, many big disasters, from earthquake, from tsunami, from typhoon, landslide, flood, firestorm, etc. And the disaster trend tends to increase by year. So if we think how will it become when we can deal with disaster in 30 years from now, or in several hundreds years from now, will we have any change, or are we not going to have any change? Sometimes we reflect on what happened, for example, 30 years back in Indonesia, and we reflect what happened today. It seems that we don't have any change or very slight change. So we try to see far to the future, when it will be our generation to lead, and maybe our generation to decrease, to leverage on the collective intelligence and frontier thinking of the youth and young professionals to challenge, create, and negotiate concepts and frameworks for disaster risk reduction and resiliency in 2045, and familiarize with future literacy as capacity, foresight as a tool-based approach, and also future thinking as a posture, and engage with system thinking and collective intelligence processes on specific DRR topic. So the process that we go through started from January. We had the initiation, co-design, and simulation. We have already 2 times lab. The first lab is on future risk governance, held on July, and the second topics was on October, on disaster risk knowledge. And then the third topic, this is delayed, not November, but will be on February. After each lab, we have a Let's Talk DRR, which elaborate the result of the 3 days of FLL. And then prior to the lab, we have a webinar on, webinar 1 was on reflecting from the past and the present. And also the second webinar will be held on December, is on future thinking in disaster risk reduction and resiliency. And we aim to have the output of this thinking of this lab process as a report to the global platform for disaster risk reduction. But actually what is really interesting and what is really built up our capacity is the journey through all this lab. So as Mang Jiang, for example, has already explained, we have a very intensive preparation, establishing the core team, establishing the partnership. We had a co-design process every week. I see Lea, Josie, and Kuchao maybe also here. So we had every Friday evening, 1 hour to co-design all the process. And during all the co-design, we learned new things about future literacy. We learned about various methods. We learned to imagine, and we also learned how to facilitate and how to dig ideas. So from January until now, so this is the several co-design and the process that we had from January until November. And we'll go through until May. So going to each of the process, we started with a webinar on reflecting from the past. And the past is, now we are in 2020. We reflect for the future until 2045, and we reflect back for 30 years. And we can invite very historical people, for example, Prof. Rajib Shaw and a professor from JICA, who are engaged with the global framework for disaster risk reduction and the development. So we understand what has happened 30 years back, and we aim to imagine what we want or what might happen using the probable, preferable, and reframing process in 2045. So we had an evolution of thinking around disaster and resilience over the last 3 decades, including what was envisioned back then and what has been achieved, and then the remaining gaps. We also had opportunity to reflect on the need to adopt innovation approaches toward DRR, focusing on future thinking. We had about 300 participants in each webinar and Let's Talk DRR, mostly from Asia Pacific, but we also have participants from Europe, Africa, and America. So for the lab itself, we limit to 30 young people from across, mainly across Asia, from 12 countries, and these are chosen based on the country chapters of UNSPIRE Alliance. But the recommendation comes from both the 4 organizations. So recommendation from UNESCO, UNDRR, UNDP, and UNSPIRE Alliance. I think John has also mentioned that the participants play a very important role, and that's why we are doing a close nomination to ensure that they are familiar with the topic that we are going to talk. So this is the process. In the first lab, we had previously, the first one, we had a simulator. So we have a training for facilitator. And the theme was on home, future of home. And after that, we have the first future literacy lab on DRR future thinking on disaster risk governance. I was the group facilitator at that time. So the 30 participants was divided into 5 teams. And I was the facilitator for purple team. So we started into the phase. This is a similar phase that Mang Jiang Sebastian has also mentioned. We started to go to our journey to 2045 and then think about the probable future. So when we land in 2045, what is the first thing that we imagine? So we start to brainstorm from there. And from the early stage, there was already a discussion on we have more collaboration, more inclusive participation. We have more collective solution. We have more capacity. And also we are using more technology in our daily life and daily solution. After that, we go into the desirable future in 2045. And for this process, in the first lab, we can explore freely what is our desirable future. But in the second lab, we use the future triangle, which make also our desirable future more systematic. The desirable future for the future is coming on the imagination on more effective disaster risk governance, on more powerful cross-sectoral collaboration, science research-based platform, culture of prevention, and strong youth involvement. Then we go to the next phase, which is phase 2, on the reframing. And for the reframing, we use the murmuration intensive society. So I think on the first day when we started the reframing process, everyone was like, what is murmuration intensive society? And everyone needs some time to think. But then when people started to bring the ideas, then it opened up more ideas from the other participants, and it enabled the group to build the ideas collectively. We use the CLA, or cause layer anticipatory. So we imagine what is the headlines that we imagine in 2045, what are the underlying assumptions, who are the actors involved, and how is the process going on. So in my group, for example, we come up with a headline of the government is making a difference, and we got making a difference. And how it can make a difference, we brainstorm on the process, on the actors, etc. And we can come up with an idea, a collective idea from the reframing process to have a harmony, and also a more optimist, and a capability to be fluid and adaptive, easy to adaptive. So I will show after this the video of the murmuration intensive society. It's how we can see the birds can move in harmony, and they can adjust the movement each other. And so that's how we try to see the results that we're using. It was very helpful to have the Miro board. So we, the facilitator, already prepare the boxes for each group, and for each phases there are 1 boxes, and so the participants will brainstorm in that boxes and also share their thoughts simultaneously. And that will happen each day for 1 day for 3 hours. And in the end, there are a plenary session. And during the plenary session, everyone will reflect back of what they have learned. Sorry, I skipped this. So after the reframing process, the third day, we start with the new questions in phase 3. The new questions will go back to 2021 where we are, and we reflect the discussion that we had 2 days on what happened in 2000, what we had imagined in 2045, what new questions has arrived, what are the anticipatory assumptions between what we have discussed and brainstorm, and so we can see some new questions that are addressed. For example, how to maintain the long-term vision, how to distribute the power at the right time, how to achieve an integrated approach to the government. So that's how, when we see the future, what action that we want to take now, it will bridge to that point. And after that phase, the new questions, we go to the phase 4 on reflection using SLA. Learn, still want to know, what did you learn? What do you still want to know? And what action will you take? And for this phase 4, the group is self-facilitating. So only the participants are in the group, and they will just discuss among them about these 3 items. What did they learn? What did they still want to know? And how they want to act on after they have conducted all the brainstorming on future literacy. Then in the second lab, I was assigned as the lead facilitator. And as the lead facilitator, it was actually a bit more challenging as well. But it has different feelings. So when you are the group facilitator, you really are together with the team to build the ideas. But what you know is the one group that you are in. But as lead facilitator, you need to understand what in all the groups. You need to control the discussion, like up each groups. So it also enable us to in each ideas together with the group, but together with the whole in the Sec 4 teams. And we had a little bit similar process, but the only different process was on the future. We have the pool of the past and from the future and from the present. So we have we think about all these 3 components that can drive in of our desirable future. So the reframing process was on water is knowledge. And again, in the beginning, there was some process on thinking, because we need to shift our perspective and started to see on the water. But it's very interesting to see how the 4 groups evolved the discussion. And for example, some key ideas that was built during the lab is knowledge is like home tap water, and it's a crystal clear view from different perspective with a transparent element that has no boundaries. And water, which is knowledge, need to be accessible to everyone. It is daily needs. So if we don't have water, we will be dehydrated. This is same as knowledge. When we don't have knowledge, we will be dehydrated. That's why this is part of a defense and material to solve problems. And with this, we can also understand new emerging hazards. We can go to the grassroots communities because it is everyone to our future. What other that are very interesting is also linking to the farming. Farming are growing knowledge. So what do we want to plan to harvest in 2045? So this is some ideas that evolve in the FLL too. So I think basically there are 6 learning on my reflection. The changes of on the commitment, it a lot of time if somehow. I think from my side now every Friday. Sorry, I think I was my connection was cut. Can you hear me back?
Yes, we can hear you now.
And can you still see my screen on the
Yes.
my reflection?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
we can see.
Thank you. So we have different culture even from the core team and also with the facilitator. We work with 13 more countries, and then we have a different time zone. We have all, for me and for many of us, it's a new experience. And also the ability to imagine creatively is a challenge. I think this is same as Manjang has also mentioned previously, especially for me when I was not used to imagine to the future. So it was very hard in the beginning, but I really enjoy when we collectively build the ideas with the other members. Then that's how we start to open up our horizon and start to think. So the learning process is very much there. We can invest, and then we have because we have a creative team, we can co-design and we can build the collective ideas. I really think that if I'm doing this alone, I will go to nowhere. But because this is a team and we are building collective ideas, then we can build something big and we can really see from different perspectives. I think it's also because we have a multinational teamwork. So the perspective is wider because we have different perspective from each of our country and our culture. And also now, thanks also to the pandemic that we are closer to technology, and this online engagement has also enabled us to work with different countries without mobilizing to the physically. Although it's yes, it's sometimes difficult with the focusing, and also sometimes we have a connection issue like just I experienced just now. And the co-designing is something that was also really significant. Co-brainstorming to get the final ideas, to build the ideas. It also learned to enhance communication skill on how to communicate what we think to the team. And also we can explore various methods using the iceberg, the CLA, the future wheels, future triangle, MIS, etc. And this is the whole process of collective intelligence. We also learn to facilitating, and I think facilitating only with same country and multinational participants has a different challenge and approach. And we really learn to public speaking as a facilitator. We learn how to handle multinational participants, and we are very grateful that prior and after the lab, we always have a preparation and an evaluation. So we can mention our difficulties, and then the FLL team in Paris will guide us on how some tips on how to facilitate, etc. And also we learn how to trigger the engagement of participants. Sometimes we have a very quiet moment and we feel like what we just mentioned. So it's we also learn those kind of process, and we learn how to trigger the participants provide ideas. We give some additional questions. So then the participants will keep growing the ideas. So such kind of process is also learning process to us as a participants and facilitator. And also we learn how our facilitator, our team facilitator is different country. So we also learn how to divide our tasks and how to co-working together. Then we learn the organizing. We have international experience with 3 big UN agencies, which bring a great possibility for us. But we also have direct exemplary leadership from the United Nations. And we have a routine debrief that help to evaluate and doing better, as I mentioned before. And we learn how to scouting close call to participants, international participants, and we learn how to do the internal and external coordination skill. Internal means within UNspire Alliance, and external with UN agencies, with others agencies. And this is all the organizing skill that we are building. And what means for work and my life is I can see the world differently, and I'm more capable to reframe problems, seeing with the different perspective, and also learn to deal with possibilities and uncertainties better. And I think that is also because I can see, okay, this is what I have. I have a problem now, I have a situation, but then I can learn to see other perspective, learning to reframe myself and learning how to find solution. I think what we are building in this lab is really solution driven. So that is a very essential skill to me. And talking about reframing process, so what we have the reframing in the first simulation was homeless. You cannot choose your home. So maybe in the first thought, we thought like this man here, because when we hear about homeless, maybe this kind of image come up. But then within the discussion, it turns on to its ideas that we can work without border and work be everywhere. Just for example, the photo, the video here, that maybe we can have a caravan as our home, and our caravan is equipped with Wi-Fi and some electricity, power charging, and it has water, it has our bed that we can sleep. So even though we cannot choose our home, but it is our choice on how we are going to live with that kind of situation. So creativity can actually come out when we have a problem. When we want to solve that kind of problem, the creativity for problem solving is actually always there if we can shift the perspective. And for the murmuration intensive society, it's like this visual of the bird. It has the harmony, and that's how we come up with the discussion that the risk governance can be with harmony and working together fluidly in a flexible, artistic, and creative in terms of finding solution. So that's how we can create disaster resilient society. And on the water is knowledge, also turn out with ideas that disaster can be just like water as a daily basis that is need, and the metaphor of drinking water of the knowledge and farming that is growing knowledge, that what we want to plant now to harvest in 2045. So in the whole reframing process, we can see as the last video here, when we see a same object, but we see from different perspective, I from Dr. Miller here, the world then change. So that is the really skill that really evolved within myself and maybe many of my friends. The creativity comes from life and creating amounts of innovation there. Co-building ideas, collective intelligence is a key for that, and create ability to face and deal with the uncertainties, surprising situation, and thinking out of the box. So that's from me. As my last closing statement is that future literacy has enabled me to be more positive, open wider my horizon, and able to see from different perspectives, think more creative, and acknowledge more on teamwork and collective intelligence. That various kind of unexpected future risks have various possible solutions. And I think that's how we can be more positive as well on dealing and being more adaptable with disaster, of natural disaster and so on, but also on our daily life. So thank you very much. 谢谢.
Thank you, Rama. That was lovely. I think your presentation just goes to show how much detail, how much incredible discussion actually comes out of the process of futures literacy laboratories. And also the different subjects it applies to. I think your slides around the reframe also showcases to our audience the variety of the reframe scenarios that we can create to form that creative space, and that it's really tailored to what each topic is about and what participants have said during probable and preferred futures during phase 1 of the lab, whether it's the murmuration, water as knowledge, or in Manjan's example, being responsible for future generations, all of these areas. I love that also how you showcase around the design details of how we can use different tools, such as the causal layer analysis, the futures triangle, and so on and so forth, in the process of shaping a futures literacy lab. Again, back to the earlier points about how there's anticipation for a future, anticipation for emergence, there's a methodological approach or capability-based approach, and the lab is really trying to tie all of this together to show that this can be a complementary process. I would love to invite our speakers to now turn on their cameras and join us by video. Also, Ching, welcome you to also continue to co-host this session. Maybe we can take a look at the whiteboard at some of the questions the audience has given to us and to take a moment to reflect. Oh, lovely. There's so many interesting questions. Okay, so I have on screen Sebastian, myself, Ching, and Rama, and also Manjan. So please hold up your hand and pick a number between 1 and 3. Just by your fingers, if you can hold up your hand. We have 5. Let me add it all up. 6. Why don't we take question number 6? So, how to look at the relationship between designers and the public in the intelligent age. Okay, so perhaps we need to break down this question a little bit. The public, perhaps we can conceive of them as the broader audiences that we engage with, the designers being those who facilitate and co-design processes or design specific objects and so on and so forth. And in the intelligent age, I welcome everyone to offer a few thoughts of what this intelligent age could be. It sounds like to me that it's an age where we value intelligence, but is this intelligence something that is continuously learned, or is it something that's predefined? So I will open this up to our facilitators, maybe the emphasis around the relationship between the designers and the participants in the public. Perhaps we can start with Manjan. Would you like to give a first go?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And I look at the word intelligent age. So for me, how I understand intelligent age is more like the world is closer connected by the technology that enables us to transfer or communicate intelligence or knowledge in an easier way. Then how we look at the relationship between designer and the public. So I'm not a designer, but just based on my limited knowledge on this is, I think there are two ways of to looking at the relationship. From a designer's perspective, I think the public is something they gain what is the needs of the public, and based on the needs, based on the demands, based on what they like and dislike, then they design something. So they are working, their provide services for design for the public. Then looking at the public perspective, I think designer is something that they are in the front of a certain area. For example, we say, let's say the Apple phone. Apple's designer, there's something who are in the front edge in this technology and in this mobile phone using. So they are something that kind of they know, they are the know-how person. They know how to develop and kind of create new ideas, new ways of using technology. Yeah, kind of KOL. So they can kind of they can dominate and kind of determine what is the way the future and the way of people thinking, how they use in the daily life. So yeah, I think there's a hierarchy there between the designer and the public.
Yeah, definitely interesting. And maybe we can draw a connection to Futures Literacy Labs also to this, is that we sort of flip this on its toes, because we emphasize designers to be from, say, the audience that we want to engage with themselves, to be from those communities, to essentially help co-shape what the process looks like. The emphasis around peer facilitation, given that since we don't know the future, how can we think about this together? Do we have any thoughts from Sebastian or Rama?
I mean, in a really short way, I think this question is really interesting, because it shows that there has to be a relationship between designers and the public. So I think this is a cultural issue, because as a designer, especially in futures literacy, because it's such an individual capability to develop, it is really important to look at the cultural context. So in what kind of way are target audiences and participants able to imagine the future and imagine uncertainty, and be able to be put into uncertain and almost, or sometimes uncomfortable situations, and how do they react to it? This is a very sensitive thing and very empathetic, and that's what I think is really important in this relationship. You have to be empathetic as a facilitator in order to design a lab.
Thanks. And Rama?
Thank you. Is it still on number 6? Just to make sure.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think I will take also on the discussion that happens during the FLL, because we have a kind of similar questions on how do we see the relationship between each actor, and here is on designer and the public. And we tend to see and imagine that the actors will have more collective consciousness, or more fluid, and it can have a collective intelligence or collective ideas building between both the designer and the public. Maybe the problem is in the public, because usually the problem is in the grassroots. But when the dialogue is enabled between the designer and the public, they can provide a solution that is grassrooted. So if the designer built the solution, design without the public, maybe they design something that is not needed by the public. But using the interaction between the designer and the public, then a designer can build something that the public need, and the public can get help of the real concrete solution that they experience in their situation. So building these collective ideas and collective consciousness together will be we hope that could be changed so to have more fluid interaction between both the designer to the public for this intelligent age. That's how I see the relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, Rama. Over to you, Ting.
Yeah. I'm a designer, in fact, so I want to say something about this question. I think with the development of tools, more people can master the work of design in the visible part. But the way of thinking of designers, the way of thinking from the problem, from the vision is unique to designers. But on the other hand, I think it's a very good trend for design work and the design thinking to mastered by more people. Which is why we carry out many activities like this to encourage more people to participate in design and build our common future together. I think so. Thank you, Sally.
Yes, lovely, Ching. Would you like to pick the next question that we discuss? We can go with somebody's lucky number. Anyone want to shout it out?
Can I just randomly pick 11?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do question number 11.
Double 11 is coming. I mean, in China.
Yes. So a little bit to the left,
I also
please.
thought about 11.
Cool.
So what did the future mean for you prior to engaging in futures literacy? What is something that has changed? And Ching, I know today would have been your first time really diving into it, but totally welcome you to jump in whenever. Who would like to take this question first? Please just go ahead and unmute. Minjun, would you like to start us off? Oh, actually, Sebastian, please go ahead.
I think the question should be, what is something that has not changed? So I think that futures literacy, when I first heard about it, yeah, you always think about the future as a person, of course, but not consciously. So then you start once you start your journey in futures literacy, I think you start thinking about the future in a conscious way and then reflect upon it in the present. And that's why I would say, what is something that has not changed? Because you try to reframe yourself every day, you try to see your assumptions, and I think it really creates some chaos in your mind once you start off with it. And then yeah, I think I am still trying to learn to live with this chaos, and I like what it does to me, the way of thinking, and it has affected all of my work, all of my life, actually.
Minjun?
Okay, yeah, I'll go next. Before I engage in future literacy, I think, as Sebastian mentioned, that I thought about future, but in a not unconscious way. And future meant to me is something vague. I don't know. It's uncertainty. Okay, future is there, but what will happen, I don't know. And I actually am not aware of what is significance of thinking about future. But after engage in future literacy, I think I am more confident in thinking about future, how deeper, how logically I can think about future, critically think about future. I'm more confident in it. And also I really see now future is something, I want to use hope, the word to describe it, because of the uncertainties, because we don't know what will happen, then that means hope for me. If we know what we want in the future, and we also know what we can do to make that preferred future happen, I think it's we can see a lot of hope there. And yeah, I think I become more optimistic about future after engage in future literacy, and I do see the power of future. Yeah.
Thanks, Minjun. Definitely in shaping what we see and hear and engage with in the present, right? Like it sounds like it's giving you a bit of a paradigm shift in the present. Rama or Chi?
Yeah, I think me is more or less same as Sebastian and Manjang. I didn't really, I couldn't really imagine the future previously, and maybe I will just like, oh, 2045, what will it be? But it's mostly maybe derived from the movie, for example. For example, The Flash or something. We are very driven from the movie. But when we started to talk, it's actually provided, we are given opportunity to imagine, and not only one possibility but various possibility. And we tend to be more systematic in a way that we can, if we can imagine what kind of future we want and what kind of future that might happen, what kind of uncertainties that might be within the process, we can actually try to learn to anticipate several things. It's like when we do some programming. So if we choose A or B, and if there is B, you know what to do after B. Or if it has to go A, you know what will go after A. So it's actually like you try to map from today until the ideal future, but then you can make a corridor. Even though some uncertainty happened, then it will not go you to be very down or to move backward. So it's actually enable us to think more widely, and to think more systematically, and to think like when we play a chess. So we learn to think more strategically and see what will our enemy will move the chess, and so how we need to move. So I think it's actually make us more more prepared to anticipate the unexpected, and also to open up that we are allowed to imagine. It's not that the future is totally a fate, but it's something that we can actually control. And even though the unexpected happened, we can still take control of that unexpected situation. So I think that's my takeaway.
Thanks, Rama. Something that I'm hearing from all three is thinking about future is a very conscious act that we're doing. And it's true, because when we walk down the street, we can see on like billboards, advertisements, they say the future of, vacuuming or the future of cleaning tools, and it's going to change the way you wash your dishes or something like this. It's actually everywhere around us, but we're not always conscious about how we're thinking about it. And by being futurist literate, by being conscious of it, it's actually a very empowering process. I myself in the same way. As a young graduate, we might think, what will the future look like for us? Finding jobs, employment, so on and so forth, trying to gain experiences in life. And we might think that there's a predetermined path that's been expected of us, or that we need to go into. When there's an illustration of the image of the future that we don't see ourselves in, it's very disempowering. But once we realize that we can actually imagine the future for ourselves, imagine it with people that are near us in our community together to see what that future looks like, that gives us that sense of empowerment back, and allows us to see that, hey, we can become actionable. We can be implicated in this future that is desirable to us. So that I think is quite the interesting piece to highlight. And around emergence, when imagining a future that is constantly shifting, that has no end in mind, I think also gives us a sense of peace. It prepares us. It forms us with humility when we engage with the future. We're humble about what is to come, because we no longer feel the need to plan everything out in detail, schedule minute by minute what we do, but we allow things to emerge. And like Rama, you said, take advantage of these uncertainties that come, that emerge to us, that come forth to us. So that's another point I'd like to add. Ching, would you like to pick the next question that we discuss?
I think the time may be limited. Yeah. Mhm. So maybe we can end this Q&A part.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Maybe we can all go around saying just one word before we end off then. I can start us off. Thank you so much to the Tsinghua team for organizing this with UNESCO. It was really exciting to come and speak to you about Futures Literacy. Next week on November 14th, you'll hear from the head of Futures Literacy at UNESCO, Riel Miller. He will be presenting a keynote, so you can also hear directly from him and his perspectives on FL, the capacity and what it means to think about the future and emergence. And yes, again, thank you to Professor Fu, thank you to Ningxia, thank you Dan, Yichen, and everyone who's been involved in organizing this, and of course to our lovely speakers, and John, Sebastian, John Sweeney, as well as Rama. It was truly lovely to hear about these different perspectives and how you engage with the design of the lab, the capacity itself, and your own learning lessons that you've taken away from this. But now opening it up to all of you to share your final word.
Okay. Thank you, Sally. And very many thanks for distinguished guests for the very interesting and informative presentations. And this is my pleasure to present the agenda of next week International Conference on Design Futures. Next Thursday on November 13th, there will be 4 keynotes and 2 panels on future society and the future design education. And on November the 14th morning, there will be 24 papers publishing. And on 14th afternoon, there will be 2 ideas lab about new space economy and APSI and Syposis. So that's all of today's ideas lab. Thank you all the audience. Happy the beginning of winter. Thank you. And see you next week. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day. See you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Fu, as well.
Oh, thank you.
Lovely to see you.
You.
Have a lovely rest of your day.
Mhm.